Good afternoon, how are you? Was Tom tremendous? Can we give him another round of applause? He's given us a lot of good ideas, inspirations, and understanding about why the West and why California is seen as the leading edge of pushing the envelope on a sustainable and a more just economy. You're doing it in California, you're doing it throughout the West, and the numbers are clear. He's given us a really good big picture of where we're advancing, not only in this part of the region, but throughout the United States. And what we're going to do today is actually go deeper. We're going to get to how it actually happens on the ground, because of the reputation of California is really stood up by the people that you see on this panel today. So let me first introduce who we'll be talking to, and we'll have an informal discussion about how we're making the green economy work in this region. Kathy Gerwig first is our Vice President. She's Vice President of Employee Safety, Health, Wellness, and Environmental Stewardship at Kaiser Permanente. And in this position, she's managing a nationwide environmental initiative for the organization. Everyone has a larger bio in your packet, but Kathy, welcome to today's panel. I'm not sure of the order of the presentation, but let me introduce Madeline Janis next. Madeline is sitting next to Kathy. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. Under her stewardship, Lane has become an influential leader in the effort toward a new economy based on good jobs, thriving communities, and a healthy environment. Welcome, Madeline.
Thank you.
And we all know Mary Leslie. Mary is the president of the Los Angeles Business Council. And the Business Council is an advocacy and education organization serving the local business community, and is one of Southern California's most influential international or business advocacy organization. Welcome, Mary, to today's discussion. And James McDonald is next. James is the manager of sustainability for International Paper and is responsible for helping develop, coordinate International Paper's sustainability strategy. That includes public policy and looking at environmental issues related to sustainability. We're glad to be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least is my dear friend, Dr. Manuel Pastor. Manuel is the professor of American Studies and Ethnicities at USC. He also currently directs the program for environmental and regional equity at USC and has a long track record of working on growth and equitable issues for our communities. So, what I'd like to do is to get into the weeds a little bit and maybe even be provocative. This will be an informal discussion. We only have an hour, so we can't talk a lot, but I want to hear your voices to talk about three things, and we'll talk about it in little groupings of conversations. One of the things that Emerald Cities is trying to do is what California's done, and that is to grow a sustainable region. But it really is about greening our cities, building our communities with jobs and businesses, but also promoting equity. So we're going to talk about each of those topics sort of separately. Let's just talk about the jobs piece first, and jobs and business development. That's what this conference is all about. And it's become a political football, 2012. There is no such thing as a green job. What is a green job? The expectations was we haven't performed. Obama's platform was, we're going to turn around America with this green economy. And so the question to you is, what's a green job? And what are you doing in your space to promote green jobs, good jobs in your organization? Maybe we'll start with Kathy.
Great, well, thank you. In healthcare at Kaiser Permanente, it's pretty easy actually to identify green jobs, I think, not to make it all that complicated. Certainly we have a lot of environmental services workers. Those are janitorial staff, unionized staff at Kaiser Permanente. And those are green jobs as they minimize waste, they handle the linen, they use green cleaning chemicals. There are thousands of people who are doing their jobs using green techniques. And we've also trained a lot of them, 400 in the LA area alone, green jobs training for those positions to expand their roles a little bit into looking at things like energy conservation. So those are clearly green jobs, and there are other examples. I think there are also some jobs that we sometimes don't think of as green, but are very much so. So you think about the job of engineering or construction workers who are helping to deal with energy efficiency. You know, anybody today who can deal with building commissioning, for example, that's a green job. It's one thing to build an efficient building, it's another to maintain it for 30 or 50 years, which is what we do with hospitals. So I think those are some of the things that I think about. And the last thing I'll mention is just the provision of health care. So if you're a clinician who's talking to a patient about exposures to environmental contributors to disease, or you're a clinician who can have a conversation with somebody who's been diagnosed with cancer and talk to them about some of the environmental ways that they could support their own health. You know, that's somebody who, in the broader context, has a big job about providing health care, but they are incorporating sustainability and environmental considerations into what they do. So I think, you know, there are green components to many, many jobs, certainly within the healthcare sector.
Could I just ask a follow-up question? Is this something new, or have you been doing it for 5 years, 10 years? Kaiser's always been doing this green sustainability thing. Is it, how recent is this work?
You know, it's evolved, like in lots of organizations. I'd say we can point back to when Henry Kaiser started providing health care to workers in, you know, industrial settings, building dams and so on, and incorporating some what we would call today environmentally sustainable features into that work. So I think it's been part of the heritage. You know, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to improve the health of our communities, and it's not a big leap to go from improving health to saying there are environmental contributors to disease. So if we're about healthcare, you can't be about healthcare and not be about reducing carcinogens in the environment, reducing the health effects of climate change. So I'd say we've had a very comprehensive national program with board of directors support for over 10 years. And before that, it was maybe a little bit more informal than that. But absolutely, for the last decade, it's been kind of part and parcel of the organization.
Are you actually counting green jobs?
Say that again?
Are you counting green jobs? Are you
I resist counting green jobs.
Okay.
Maybe unpopular to say to this audience. And the reason is what I mentioned before, because there are aspects of all jobs. I mean, what I would prefer to do is say, you know, we have 160,000 people at Kaiser Permanente, and I would like for 100% of them to have some component of their job that I can say there is a direct link between what they're doing, the delivery of healthcare, whatever they're doing to support the work, and greening the economy, and greening jobs, and greening the health of the patients that they're serving. So I'm more inclined in that direction than actually saying that person is 100% dedicated to a job I can call green. I'd rather see it more decentralized, but you know, would be happy to engage in a dialogue about that.
So, Manuel, did we oversell the green jobs story, or what's the green job in your mind?
Well, as you know, I tend to think about green jobs, greening jobs, and greened jobs. So the green jobs are what we think of in terms of alternative energy and that sort of a thing. The greening jobs have to do with retrofit, right, and really changing things so that they're very different. That has to do with solar installation, a number of the other things that we talk about. And the green jobs are the jobs you're talking about, the ones that are transformed, right, janitorial practices, et cetera, so that all the practices are greener. And we also have to recognize that some jobs are greened out of existence. And unless we also think about the displacement that goes on, I mean, even if there's a net job creation, if someone's losing their job, we have to be thinking about the displacement assistance and who that impacts. But on the oversell question, I think one thing I did the other day was I looked at I picked up my well-thumbed copy of The Green Collar Economy, written by our friend Van Jones, who had a short stint in Washington, as you might recall. And one of the things I noticed about that book, which was very influential, was that the publication date is October 2008, right? And so what was meant to really put a claim in the ground about this is an important part of our economic strategy, not that it is the economic strategy, wound up getting billed as though it would solve every economic problem. And that meant that it was bound to come up short. And in some sense it has, but there's a lot of potential there. I mean, nobody ever thought that the IT industry was going to get us out of the worst recession we've been in since the Great Depression. No one thought that even rescuing the auto industry would resolve all of the economic problems, but somehow people began to believe that the green economy would resolve all these problems. The reality is that the green economy is generating jobs more rapidly than the rest of the economy. The solar power industry was one of the fastest growing industries last year. The Brookings report looking at green employment in our 100 largest metropolitan areas shows that the growth rates of those green sectors is about twice what's going on in the rest of the economy. It's an important sector. It's not the silver bullet that will solve all problems. Of course, I have a lot more to say. But
We'll get to some of that later. So we know that to build a different kind of economy, a sustainable economy, a green economy, a just economy, you need all kinds of partnerships. You need labor, you need community, you need business. And so I'd like to just ask our business council, maybe we'll start with Mary as well, what are you guys doing and why do you see the green economy or green jobs as an important part of your platform and your agenda?
Well, I think back to several of the things Tom said in his opening address today. You know, we represent commercial, retail owners of property and developers, as well as hospitals and schools and large nonprofits. And I think energy is a big cost. And if you maintain and own your buildings, it's a cost you have to look at. So the whole issue of the way you build in the first place, if you build green, then the issue of if you have an existing building, what you can do to make it more efficient, the energy efficiency component. These are the key first steps, I think, for a business in terms of controlling their own costs and providing a healthy environment to their workers. Then I think, you know, now we're in a position where I think we want to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit, and we want to make sure that our key stakeholders are part of our solution. So that's why we've been so aggressively advocating for having existing businesses in major cities engage in the renewable solution. And together with Manuel and UCLA and many others, you know, we've done a lot of research and studying into the ability for businesses here to invest in energy efficiency, green building, and now solar. We would very much like to see a major investment in solar in our cities. Because unlike those little tortoises, okay, they don't crawl over the top of buildings. So it's less, you know, it's an investment we should be taking seriously. It creates local jobs, local investment. We've estimated that if we were just to make a modest investment in Los Angeles, we have over 5 gigawatts of solar rooftop potential and 19 gigawatts in the county. If we had a modest program of even 600 megawatts, we would attract $2 billion in investment in the next 8 years, and we'd create 18,000 jobs, and we'd reduce 9 million metric tons of CO2 locally. So that's, you know, I think that's where we are now, is how to come to full partnership on some of these goals with business.
So the numbers look impressive, they sound impressive, but really how tough is it for business that's stuck in the Great Recession, that's actually laid off staff over the last couple of years, that are sort of scary about reinvestment, to really think about retrofitting their buildings or making these new kinds of investments or changing their products? How tough is it, and how are they looking at these opportunities?
Well, it's working out because now it's a law.
Yeah.
So I think for most people, what Tom's trying to do and what we're supporting is that we need to create low interest rate loans. We need to create new financing. We need to make it easier for small businesses, once they've done their energy audits, to be able to actually go to the programs and invest. And we need for larger businesses to be incentivized to make the investment, because they do have the financial resources to do it.
Right. Jim, International Paper is one of the largest sustainability companies in the country, in the world. Are you making money?
We are. We are.
And tell us, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that it's interesting that we talk about green jobs. I think, if you'll bear with me for a minute, we were kind of green before green was cool. Our natural resource company, our main material that we make our packaging and our paper out of are trees, a renewable resource, would manage sustainably. I think when we look at the amount of energy that we use, we've talked about energy efficiency. I think Art or somebody mentioned this morning the best, most efficient BTU is one that's not used. So we drive for that to try to make the same amount of product by using less energy. And by using less energy, we cut more fossil fuels out. And when you begin to do that, you have all the environmental benefits, all the greenhouse gas emissions that come with that. And then the majority of our products that we use can be reused again or recycled. So we think of it from a green job perspective and this life cycle perspective. So from the sourcing to the manufacturing to the use, and then we can't do it by ourselves. You said, I mean, international paper is big, but we're not that big. We're smart, but we're not that smart. So we really rely on our partners. For instance, the 10,000 USW workers that we have. They're our partners in this. They're the ones that we're working towards, that are working with us to try to make that green economy continue to run and continue that demand for our products that we believe are a sustainable alternative to others.
Madeline has been one of the leading community voices and advocates for good jobs, green jobs, and to make sure that they're equitable and broadly distributed and available throughout the community. What are you doing in this movement to create a sustainable green economy?
Well, I think that there is really an issue about, frankly, passivity versus an assertive approach to creating new jobs. And, I think that if we expect that the green economy is somehow magically, the market forces are going to somehow magically create all these jobs, then we're bound to be disappointed. But if we actually advocate strongly for our government and all of the institutions associated with our government to do a whole bunch of things to create new jobs, then I think we can be successful. So a couple of examples. We should be pushing our government entities to source from good companies like International Paper, for example. We are in a big fight today because we are in the middle of a $72 billion build-out of our transportation system, and we're going to be building 12 new light rail lines. So next time we have this conference, hopefully here, you're going to be able to get around on rail cars, hopefully. You can dream, but we do have a dream here. We're in a fight right now to get our transit agency to spend $1 billion to buy rail cars, and by the way, make them here. And we're fighting. And it's not so easy when it comes right down to it, because we're going to buy $1 billion worth of rail cars. We could buy them. We could make them in South Los Angeles. We could create 500 jobs. By the way, these are electric vehicles. It's going to reduce the carbon emissions. The quintessential definition of a green job. But in the end, we have a company, Siemens, which is growing their presence in the U.S., who's actually willing to commit to building a factory here, to doing all the right things, and to union jobs. And we have other companies that are offering a cheaper price. And so when we come down to that decision, what are we going to do? Or is our government going to make that decision to create new jobs, to create good jobs, to really lift up places that need it so badly like South LA? That's one really important example. We need to really affirmatively build our manufacturing economy. Same thing around trash. We need to change the way we deal with trash and require increased recycling, make sure that those jobs are good jobs as well as green jobs. And if we do that, we can dramatically increase the number of jobs just by simply not putting all that trash in landfills and not shipping it to the desert and throwing it in the ocean. So I think there's, along with energy, and I think we need to finally force our utilities to change the way they do business. I think we can put a lot of the pressure on business, and we should, but in the end, we also need to make sure that our utilities are participating in the movement for green jobs. So I think there's a lot of things we can be doing in partnership, making sure that we're creating good jobs as well as being very concrete in what we're doing.
So let me ask you a little bit more and probe a little further on this. So it seems like labor gets it. What I'm hearing here is the business community gets it. There's a value proposition. There's bottom line opportunities here for businesses. Who's resisting this stuff? Where are the forces? Who are the forces pushing against you and your vision for a sustainable, just economy?
I think when you get down into the weeds, I do think that there is a certain level of acceptance that business needs to just absorb. that you cannot create a sustainable economy and pay $8 an hour. You just can't do it and not provide health care. So I think there are an increasing number of businesses that are seeing that the win-win is to pay a living wage and to green their businesses and to become partners with labor and community. And to the extent that we have businesses like that, like the businesses we have here, we can really have a new vision. But in the end, there are businesses that, they don't necessarily want to, pay the people who do the recycling or who transport the trash, for example, better wages and to do all the investment that it's going to take to create a sustainable economy. So it's not that it's pro-business or anti-business, it's pro-responsible business, pro-coalition, but that's going to take some adjustment in, the system we have today.
Jim?
I think it's a component of that is it hasn't always been that way. It hasn't always been a natural fit. It makes sense when we're talking about it in these conferences and when we network with our coworkers and other friends. It hasn't always, the communication patterns sometimes have to be rewired. And we all have to realize what it is we're trying to achieve. If it's the better of economy, more jobs, maintaining green jobs instead of moving them elsewhere. And what is it that we really need to do? And I think we've seen it over the last probably 10 to 15 years, more discussions around those areas. And I think it's a rewiring, if you will, of that communication pattern.
So Kathy, can I ask you, where's your competition? Are the other members of the health industry looking at this work in the same way that Kaiser is doing? Is everyone trying to be green and provide green products and services and pay fair wages?
Some are, not all. What I'd say is that, in part to answer the question about, where's the resistance, I'm not sure. There's obviously some kind of overt resistance, but I think more than anything, it's that it requires a change in how things are done, and that just creates resistance just by itself. So one of the things that we're doing is working with other large healthcare systems. We're actually starting something called the Healthier Hospitals Initiative, and the point of that is to say we need safety for workers, we need safety for patients, and we need environmental sustainability. And what can we do collectively as large healthcare systems to help accelerate that within the entire healthcare sector? So if all of us agree, we're going to buy products that are free of harmful chemicals that are used in medicine, and here's what we're buying, and it accounts for, many billions of dollars worth of spend. Well, that not only changes what's available in the healthcare industry, but it expands to other industries. Think about other institutional buyers. So that's part of, I think, what needs to happen is this coalition building. Conferences very much like this one, where it's a lot of different perspectives coming together and saying you need to be very explicit and purposeful about moving it forward. I've been sort of surprised at how long that can take. Even with some of the green jobs training that we've done, I thought, well, after a couple of years of doing that green jobs training, people are going to understand we've got the skilled workers who can take on new kinds of roles, in my case within healthcare. And that hasn't quite materialized. I think that's because it hasn't materialized yet. That it will, but it takes some ongoing urging and proof points and brave people to be early adopters of it, and we need to aggressively push that agenda.
That's a good point. According to some researchers, it's taken 100 years. It took 100 years for the Industrial Revolution to happen. So the question is, where are we in the Green Revolution? Manuel.
So I think a presidential candidate promising gasoline at $2.50 a gallon stands in the way. That kind of politics, wishful thinking, and pandering about our realities definitely stands in the way. I wanted to say a couple of, not that I'm a partisan, and I did want to point out that I think the point about culture change within an organization is very important. I wanted to recommend there's a new book that was put out by the UCLA Labor Center called Beyond Green Jobs, Building Lasting Opportunities in Energy Efficiency. And there's a UCLA Labor Center in the house. And one of the basic concepts in there is about going from sort of basic green jobs to what they call deep green. So in the building retrofit, that means going beyond weatherization to thinking about HVAC, building auditing, lighting, renewable energy, water conservation, operations, et cetera. And I think there is a big culture change within business that resists going from the sort of easy sell, we've gone green, we've done this weatherization thing, to all these complex changes. The other thing I think is that we, in this movement, need to think about innovation in a different way. When we think about innovation, it usually gets tied into, we need to innovate in terms of alternative energy. But the biggest things we need to innovate with are finances, right? Because one of the big things is a lot of the cost savings from this actually happens further down the road. And that's why this proposition that's being proposed is actually so important, because it gets the financing up front to do things that will save you money further down the line. We need to do a lot of innovation around job training, so that we do have good job training programs. We have to make sure that they're actually reaching out to the communities that are most disadvantaged and most in need, and innovate around job training. And we need to innovate around our organizing, coalition building, and public policy, right? So the fact that you get alternative, unlikely suspects to come together around particular policies, I think those are where the innovations need to take place. The innovation is taking place around alternative energy, et cetera. That needs to happen. But we need to think about innovation in terms of our financing, in terms of our job training, and in terms of our political and organizing practice.
So I just, before we move from this topic, I want to hear the others in terms of what you think we really need to accelerate this movement, to really get it beyond where it is today, to really see something transformative. And particularly in the business community, I think, Madeline, you started talking about some of the policies that we need. What are the policies? What are the initiatives? We heard a little bit just from Manuel to really take this to the next plateau.
Well, I was just going to say, in addition to these unlikely alliances, that we need more local policy drivers, because what's happening is we conducted a study recently, we just released it in the last year, about building LA's workforce, and we took a look at who we're training and where they're working. We're finding that 2,200 individuals are getting trained in LA County in solar installation, but half those jobs don't exist here. And the jobs that do exist, people are driving to other counties for. So this is sort of counterproductive. We spend a lot of money federally training people, and then we don't have any policy locally that complements the training investment money that we've made. So I think one of the things is connecting these dots up and making sure that we have local investment. And I share Madeline's enthusiasm for our utility getting more engaged. We have a $4 billion utility, and it invests all over the United States. Actually employs more people, I think, in Utah than it does anywhere else in the United States. And we would like more of that investment to occur here in the city of Los Angeles and spur the energy investment here that will employ the people that are appropriately trained and ready to go. Because as we said in our report, they're all dressed up, they have nowhere to go. So.
Just one good example of that
Yes.
is that our utility, the Department of Water and Power, which, fortunately we own actually as taxpayers, so we have this amazing opportunity. They spend millions of dollars every year on, rebates for refrigerators and buying light bulbs from China. And that's a big part of the energy efficiency budget. And, imagine what we can do with that, and we're involved in a campaign right now. Imagine if we just took that money, that chunk of the budget, and we put people to work actually changing HVAC systems and doing water conservation and all of those things. We're going to create 10,000 jobs. Over time, we're going to create a lot of jobs just by doing things differently, thinking more long-term and embedding these ideas, in a culture change. Now, our utility is publicly owned, if we can even think about investor-owned utilities as well.
Jim, did you want to
tell
us what you need to?
Well, I think from a manufacturing perspective, we look at it as also maintaining our base. I think when we talk about these green jobs, they obviously have to be economically viable. Again, this morning in the panel, they can't be a flash in the pan. I think that was a statement that was used this morning. It can't be just a one-time grant. It has to be something that's sustainable. From an environmental perspective, it's not got to be something that is going to be detrimental to the environment. It has to be something that either complements that everything we make has an environmental impact. How do we improve that impact? We talk about reducing our footprints and trying to manufacture things more in an innovative way. That innovation is happening. I think the last part from a social perspective is how are we dealing with our communities and how are we training those folks? When I look at our workforce right now, in the next probably 4 or 5 years, we're going to lose a lot of people that have been through 30 plus years of working in our industry. And I don't know about you, but I haven't talked to a lot of young folks today that want to move to Bogalusa or that want to live in Texarkana, Texas at this point. So they're looking for these green jobs. They're looking for how do we reclassify that term a little bit to say there are currently jobs that support all three of these pillars, from the social, from the environmental, and the economic. And how do we encourage that so we can train those folks then to be the innovators, to be the collaborators, to be the ones that take that to the next level where we're using less energy, less water, and really build those human resources.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add in, not from a policy perspective, but just two other sort of complementary ideas around what could change things from a business perspective. And one has to do with providing the evidence around cost. I mean, as we make decisions, I'm sure the same is true for Jim, that it's going to be based on cost, but it's the total cost of ownership. So it's not just the incremental cost of what you might spend to do something greener to begin with, but the total cost of ownership, and to have reliable data about that, prepared by CFOs and people that our CFO would listen to. I think there's a gap there that from a business perspective, we're kind of creating that every time we want to propose something new. And if we could create a body of knowledge around that, it would be so much easier to say, we need a sustainability coordinator in every hospital in the US, because those jobs will save money and they'll be good green jobs, but the proof points aren't there.
Right. Well, I also think it's important that I think the message that Tom said to us earlier was full cost accounting too is
right.
important. So understanding costs and it's all in its entirety is critical to this. Two other areas I want to talk on quickly, and I'm not sure what our time is, but I wonder about how this thing goes viral, right? And this notion of sustainability and building markets, consumer markets, where people are really concerned about the health. I mean, we talk about jobs a lot, but underneath this notion of green jobs is that we're dealing with some very significant environmental challenges. We are running out of water. We're running out of landfills. We're running out of energy, or energy at least at the fossil fuels or non-renewable energy sources. Do people really get that, or they're just looking for the jobs piece? Do people really understand the health component of this? And how do we build a consumer awareness about really lifestyle changes, values that really have to shift about whether you take a bus or take a train or you get in your car, or whether you blast the heat in your house? Or is there, what is the work that needs to be done to raise our awareness about the environmental challenges and the lifestyle and personal challenges that we're going to confront with this issue?
You're looking at me?
You always have something to say, Manuel, so I figured.
My wife contends that I have many opinions, many of them ill-informed. But I will say that this is actually really a challenge, because it is true that the thing that moves people most of all is the health issues, and often they're viewed as short-term. So one of the pieces of research actually we did during the Proposition 23 debate was we had done a report called Minding the Climate Gap, looking at the fact that it was communities of color that faced a lot of the highest risks from climate change. And in particular, we looked at the various facilities in the state of California. We figured out that the two oil companies that were financing Prop 23, Valero and Tesoro, were amongst the top 8 companies, or they owned their facilities amongst the top 8 facilities in terms of negative health impacts, and they were amongst the top 7 in terms of having the most environmentally disparate impacts of any facilities. So we were able to really motivate people around the health questions. I think it's a tougher sell to get people to think intergenerationally about protecting the planet. And I think that one kind of vehicle to do that is with our young folks who really do seem to get it, right? But I do think a lot of those of us who are, let's say, of a more graceful age, often haven't fully grasped as much the environmental crisis that we're facing. Now, Denise is a moderator on this panel, but many of you who know her know that she's spoken eloquently about this for really 10 to 15, I think, 20 years, back when you were 13 years old.
Yeah.
About the need to think about a society which is really involved in recycling buildings, recycling neighborhoods, recycling industries, and really being sustainable over the long haul. But I would say that there have been not enough pioneers doing this kind of work?
I think it's a combination of carrot and sticks, and that, oftentimes we think of it all as carrots, and, somehow we think that people are magically going to change their behavior, even though it costs more or it's more effort. I think it's a combination of the two things. We start with our trash. And, right now we conveniently throw our trash in landfills that are mostly in poor neighborhoods, or we send it to recycling facilities that are in really poor neighborhoods where, the horrible environmental impacts are on the others. And part of the problem is that we have very little we have no laws, very few laws that require recycling in businesses and in industrial and multifamily apartments. And so we're moving a policy right now in the city of Los Angeles that's going to dramatically change that. That's going to require recycling for everybody, and that's going to regulate in a way that we haven't had regulation before, and it's going to give us the opportunity to recycle, and it's also going to kind of put a lot of pressure on us to recycle. And I think that's the set of carrots and sticks that are going to make real change. And until we're ready to to push our government, local, state, federal government, so we've done better in California, but we have to do more to really embed those changes, and then obviously we have to all work together to make everybody want to change.
Great. It's clear in the health field that the health and environmental issues are more prominent in your among employees, among your decision makers in your company. And are there advances or things that need to be done to help consumers understand the importance of sustainability and conservation?
I think there are. One thing I might challenge is, does everybody actually need to know the long-term consequences of the health impacts of environmental contributors to disease? I'm not sure. I mean, what we found is, we were part of the No on 23 campaign, and what people really wanted to hear in that, they wanted a physician to say there are short-term health impacts if we allow this proposition to pass. And people listened to the word of a physician on that, and it broke it down to, oh, you're talking about my health, my immediate health, the health of my kids and family. So that seems to be what resonated the most and had the broadest appeal. So the idea that we actually need to go out and educate everybody on, these very broad and complicated issues around health and the environment, I think what I'm learning is that that's actually not where we need to go. Breaking it down, making it simple, making it immediate, and those of us who are working on the policy side can certainly keep the longer term in mind. But I think people just want to know. They care about, oh, that chemical might result in cancer in my family. That results in action. People won't buy that product anymore. And it could result in even public policies around things like chemical reform, which would go a long way to protecting the health of our population.
So there's a number of policy wonks in Washington, D.C. who are trying to really figure out how to monetize green and healthy homes, and to really look at the health industry in a way to say, well, if we fix up homes and make them more environmentally supportive of families, you'll cut down on asthma and other respiratory problems, and you won't have this sort of emergency care visits as you have. And there's a cost, there's a preventive savings there. And would you pay for that? Is that something the health industry would consider, and to figure out the relationship between a green and healthy home and the incidences of emergency services and the costs that you would be preventing?
Well, I think the way to tap into that from the healthcare sector is around research. I mean, there are many millions of dollars going into all kinds of health research, and to try to pinpoint the kinds of issues that you're raising, I think there's a ton of opportunity there, and that feeds right in then to building the evidence that allows you to have the conversations with patients and the broader communities around those outcomes. So, I'm all for evidence. I mean, healthcare is evidence-based. So let's make this an evidence-based conversation.
Well, one of the things that is dear to my heart, and I think many of you up here, is this question of social justice, environmental justice, equity. It's clear that we've had a number of economic booms over the last 100 years, right? The industrial boom, the digital, information boom, and people of color have often been left out of those economic opportunities. What are we doing now? As we're trying to build this new green economy, this emerging green economy, what are we doing? What do we need to do to ensure that folks that have been marginalized, that have been left out of these opportunities in the past, get to play this time? That they not only get to play in the jobs, but they get to play in the policy formulation? Because a lot of what we've talked about is going to cost more money. As we start, penalizing people for throwing away trash, it's going to cost more. The waste is going to cost more. The water is going to cost more. The energy is going to cost more. How do we make certain that the challenges aren't disproportionately given to folks that have been burdened by environmental challenges in the past? What's the work that needs to be done to engage folks in the job opportunities and in the policy formulation?
Well, I just happen to have a new book about that.
A little softball.
Called, it's got a great title, Just Growth, Inclusion and Prosperity in America's Metropolitan Regions. And it's based on the notion that it's not just growth, not growth alone, that will solve our problems. We need to have just growth, right, where we put equity up front. And I know that the colleagues here, particularly Mary and Madeline, we'll talk about this more on the policy side, but I think we also need to kind of rethink what the research tells us. What we've been finding out for the last 10 to 15 years with work is that those metropolitan regions in the United States that are more equitable, that actually deliver growth in a way that includes more people, reduces pockets of poverty, et cetera, actually grow more rapidly and sustainably over time. And I know you might be looking at me and say, well, geez, maybe he's like some leftist professor and, he used to work at UC Santa Cruz. That's a place that doesn't have grades. Their mascot is the banana slug, or as I used to think of it, the fighting banana slug. But that research has actually been replicated by the Cleveland Federal Reserve, a well-known left-leaning organization that took a look at metro regions like the size of Cleveland, and they found out that those metro regions that had less racial segregation, more income equity, less concentrated poverty, grew more rapidly and sustainably over time. And actually, interestingly, this research has just been replicated on the international level by another well-known left-leaning organization, the International Monetary Fund, which looked at growth trajectories over time and found out that more equitable societies grow more sustainably and rapidly over time. And we're in the midst of research now looking at the fact that environmentally unjust regions actually tend to just get more environmental damage. That is, if you think you can put it in someone else's backyard, like landfills, you just wind up getting more of it, right? If you make sure that the burdens are shared more equitably, people figure out how to reduce them. So I think one big mind shift, paradigm shift we need to understand is that equity is not a luxury good. It's not something we just do out of a sense of social justice, although we do. It's actually an imperative for the new economy. It's an imperative for making sure that people are capable of participating and being productive in it, and that it will really help us over the long run. And these two have been thinking about the kind of policies that will actually make that thing possible.
I'm going to say that, we can wonk out as much as we want, but ultimately it's about power, and it's about poor communities of color organizing, and poor people of color who are facing the unfair burdens, really learning how to stand up and lift their voices. And it's about foundations and responsible businesses funding organizing, and really the people themselves who are most impacted, their voice is really being lifted up. And I think the more we're successful at doing that and building coalitions and powerful policy campaigns and other campaigns that really do that, the more we're going to change things. Because I think so long as we're talking about the other, all the research in the world isn't going to change anything. I think that organizing people alone without the research also doesn't work. So we need the research, we need to make those powerful arguments, but ultimately, really most importantly, is we need to barrel down, and we're not going to do it online. We're going to do a little bit of it online, but mostly we're going to have to do it knocking on doors and organizing meetings like this, but in communities, in schools, in churches, in union halls, and that's how we're going to change.
The other deal is that we're just missing markets. You know, what we found was that we looked at that 5 gigawatts of solar rooftop potential, and we saw that 1.5 gigawatts of it was multifamily. So when our governor, Schwarzenegger, decided to do the 1 million roofs, to do the net metering, you know, that program went to who could afford it. So, you know, solar as we know it in California went to people who could afford it. So it ended up in certain neighborhoods, for sure on residential solar. What we discovered is 71% of people in Los Angeles are renters, and they're living in multifamily apartment buildings, and many of them are low-income multifamily apartment buildings. But this is the good news. Those are the biggest, greatest roofs for solar. So what happened was, all of a sudden what we started to see was where the greatest solar potential was all these multifamily roofs that are in the highest communities of need, where we train people. So if we could just get a policy that actually would reward that, we could be we could be employing thousands of people every year, and we could be bringing down the cost of the multifamily apartment units to both the owners who are owning and operating those units and for potentially the tenants within them. So, you know, there's a lot of social good we could do. And lucky for us, this is well distributed through the city of Los Angeles. So part of this is, and who would pay for it? Who would pay for it is the private sector, because that's going to be their dollars that pay for the technology, for the solar, for the installation. So we think with a very small incentive for these programs, we would reap a huge social benefit.
Well, that's the whole question about just even the multifamily sector and how we don't create another sort of energy divide, like we have a digital divide, is a big question, because on the one hand, if you look at the public good charges, which we lost in California, when you look at how that money was allocated, to whom it was allocated, it really went to a lot of single-family homes. And there's been a part of our movement is to make certain that a fair share of those public assessments, those public taxes, are actually used for multifamily homes as well, where we find a lot of low-income communities. And we also noted that sort of how do you green distressed housing? You know, in the inner city, we have houses that have been experiencing housing divestment for 50 years, where you couldn't get, you know, business loans or home loans, and you can't insulate if you've got a hole in your roof. And so how do you, even with the weatherization assistance program, how do you weatherize a home that's got these structural challenges of plumbing and wiring and roofing? What happens is that you walk away. You don't get those energy services because you've had 50 other years of housing divestment. How do we manage those kinds of policy issues and make sure that we don't create pockets of, you know, energy poverty in the future? So that's my own little platform, but
that was a statement.
Right.
Yes, exclamation point.
Yeah.
Exclamation, right. So I don't know, Jim.
That federal money, I think, Denise, the neighborhood stabilization program was meant to help with that. You know, virtually Mercedes Marquez went from here to Washington. Yeah. So I think to a certain extent that money.
Well, it's actually, the money is there. It does not blended in a way that makes any sense. So there's money out of EPA and CDC and HUD, and none of it's integrated in a way that you can go to a home and do a one-stop servicing and fix all the things that need to be fixed and get the house to be energy efficient and healthy. So we're working on finding a way to begin to integrate those revenue streams in a way that's useful for folks that are on the ground doing the work.
The problem is you have this split incentive, right, where you have the owner of the multifamily building and you have the tenants, and the tenants pay the bills and the owner gets the benefit or whatever. So, but we do have this one thing in common with all the apartment buildings is that they're all served by a utility. So we've got to get our utility to step up and do a strong low-income program and figure out how we blend the different streams and make that happen.
But even beyond the split incentive, we've got a policy in California that says you cannot give landlords money to improve their HVAC systems and major systems in buildings, which really get you energy efficiency, because it's giving money to landlords and not tenants, even though it's to the benefit of tenants. So we've got to struggle with some policy issues even when we don't have challenges of split incentives. But anyway, we've got 5 minutes left to wrap up, I think, which something's been a very engaging and informative conversation. So we've talked about jobs, we've talked about the environment, we've talked a little bit about equity. What I'd like to hear from you at this point is how California is going to take over the world and be the most sustainable region in the globe. What's the promise of the future, and what would be that one single act or policy or initiative you would like this audience to get behind? Manuel.
Don't get behind one thing. This is actually a complex problem, and it's a wide suite of solutions that'll be necessary. We did work with Mary on the, how to think about this issue of delivering the benefits to the tenants, even in the kind of system we've got, and look at where this stuff is. We're going to get at this a million things at a time, and we may have to sell it under one big thing, green jobs. If there is one idea, it would be that, do you remember the end of that movie, Casablanca, one of my favorite movies, and the French detective says to Humphrey Bogart, or he says to someone else, round up the usual suspects? We need to round up the unusual suspects, right? We need to bring together people in alliances that have not been there before, and we need to understand that collaboration is best defined as principled conflict, right? That you bring together people which you may have some conflicts around. You may wind up struggling later about things, right? But you've got some principles you're trying to achieve. You've got some principles about how you will conflict with one another. And if you think about it that way, you really can build the alliances that will change this.
Thanks.
You stole mine. Collaboration.
Do you like
Casablanca?
Yeah,
It's Casablanca.
I'm struggling for a movie analogy, but I think the collaborative nature that you described, there is not one answer. We've talked about the different partnerships, the policy answers, the manufacturing side, the employee side, the consumer side of it. How do we balance all of that in? And I think that's a great term. Round up the unusual suspects. Rewire your communications. Meet with the people that make you feel the most uncomfortable. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think we're going to have better benefits through that type of engagement. Yes, it's extremely uncomfortable, even internally. You talked about corporate challenges and culture. Absolutely. And I think that's the one thing that I would leave with this group.
Thank you.
I mean, I think the federal government gave us a big gift, many gifts, some not very well organized, but there's this other one, this ITC deal where, from now to 2016, you get a federal tax credit for installing solar, and it's kind of a gift because for every dollar you spend, they basically give you 30 cents back plus another 10 cents depending on who you are. So right now, that's given the cost of installing solar, that's a big incentive. So not figuring out policies to leverage that incentive right now, why it would be a competitive advantage to do so, is really short-sighted on our part. So I think we should correct that here in the city of LA.
Thanks. Madeline.
See, I think we need to have a bold package of policies and fight like hell to win them. And I think that we're not going to do that right now on the federal level. In Los Angeles, we, at Lane and many of our allies have a package of policy proposals that we're now calling Prosper LA. We're calling on the City Council and the County Board of Supervisors and the state legislature, and it goes from manufacturing to waste. And I think, we're not very good at coming up with our, no taxes ever that, other people on the other side have. But I think we need to do better on that. And we can. Good jobs, green jobs is a good start. And we need to have a package of policies that have concrete results and organize like crazy and fight in California to continue doing what we've been doing really well.
Great, thank you. Kathy.
I guess something that we learned on the journey around green buildings is that when we called the work green buildings work, that people were way less interested than when we talked about having the best performing buildings. And I sort of am coming to that same conclusion around jobs. I mean, there are good jobs, and the definition of a good job ought to include it being a green job. And so part of what I would like to see us do is provide the evidence to that, look at the total cost of ownership as we make investments, think about all of the things that create a healthy economy, and make sure that sustainability and being green is part of that.
Thank you. Can we give them a really good round of applause? I wish this was my living room and then we'd pop open the wine and have the cheese and have more conversation. It's a great conversation, and thank you all very much.